All right, there we are. We're now at now. And yeah, my marks aren't quite right today. I think my camera got bumped while I was away. Anyway, welcome everyone. Looking forward to this lecture because it is going to be a relatively short lecture because I want to give you guys time with your teams to start working on your audience analysis. And that's actually what we're going to be kind of finishing up today is our discussion of audience analysis. So if you remember this whole thing right here, this is our communication, I call it a life cycle. I don't know. It all started with purpose. Remember, what is your purpose in communicating? And you guys, your teams have already put together purpose statements for your communications campaign. That's great because the purpose then decides our audience. And as we started talking about last week, audience is deep. This stuff is deep, right? It's pretty darn involved, and that's why the audience analysis is the most important part of your communications campaign. That's why we do all our research around that and so forth. And so we want to make sure that we're well set up for that. So by way of reminder, we talked about demographics. Remember, demographics are the things that are easy to observe and measure, things like age, race, gender, ethnicity, some degree education. You can observe it and measure it in that what's your degree and so forth. All that sort of stuff, right? Okay. But demographics don't really matter. All right. You can't just look at someone and know them. What you really want to know are their psychographics. Their psychographics are what they think, how they feel, what pushes their buttons, what are their passions, what are their values, what steers their behavior. Your behavior, every aspect of your behavior is decided by your psychographics. Okay. So we really want the psychographics. Thing is, psychographics are a major pain in the ass to observe and measure. You can't. And so, as you remember from last week, we use demographics as a backdoor to psychographics, which looks and smells and quacks like stereotyping. But as we discuss, stereotyping is a great way to initiate a meeting. It is the absolute wrong way to decide a relationship, right? So we talked about a lot of aspects of psychographics. One of the things in psychographics that we talked about was international, right? Different cultures and so forth have different values, different principles, different things that drive their behavior. We talked about high context and low context communication. We talked about M time and P time. We talked about Herzberg's, no, it wasn't Herzberg's. We didn't do Herzberg's. We did Hofstede's. All these weird names, right? We did Hofstede's framework, how different cultures exemplify different values, or at least revere different values. Well, today what we are going to do is we are going to wrap up our discussion on psychographics, and we are going to talk about generations, okay? And then we are going to talk about what is probably the most difficult thing for folks to wrap their minds around, which is context. So when we're going to go through generations, and that's a lot of fun because we're all in these generations, right? But then I'm going to set you up for context, and I've got an idea on how to help you with context. Okay? So that's what we're doing today. So let's talk workplace. And we're going to have a lot of comments in this because we're all in different generations and we're all in the workplace. The thing that's really kind of interesting today, and this is why we talk about generations when it comes to workplace communication, is that, like, for the first time, I don't want to say first time in human history because I haven't been around that long, but for the first time, we've got like at least 4, in some cases 5 generations in the workforce. Okay? So traditionalists are still kind of there somewhat. I'm kind of skipping traditionalists. Don't worry, I'll show you what I mean here in a moment. But at the very least, we've got baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. So you, right now, if you're in the workforce, you're working with 4 generations. And these 4 generations all have different psychographics. So we want to understand these, okay? So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my family. I'm going to use my family as an example, all right? So this is my family. The first guy there, that's my grandfather. He's a traditionalist. If you were born in 1940 or earlier, you're a traditionalist. Most of you don't have any traditionalists in your family. Maybe if you have a great-grandparent who's still around, who was born before 1940, that's a traditionalist. But for the most part, not totally, the traditionalists aren't really in the workforce that much anymore, okay? But still, I wanted to throw that out there because I'm going to use him as an example later on. So then we got the baby boomers, and yeah, they are very much in the workforce. All right, now they're starting to retire, but just starting. So Brittany says, my grandma is 84, and she worked until she was 80. Okay, so not only, we are going to really key in on the fact that she worked until she was 80. Everyone, make a note of that, because the traditionalists and the baby boomers, that's their locus of self-worth. That is how they define themselves as, I work until I was 80 sort of thing. So we'll come back to that. So baby boomers, my father was a baby boomer. Your grandparents may very well, if your grandparents were born before 41 or between 41 and 64, they're baby boomers. Odds are most of your parents are baby boomers. Zara says they're workaholics for sure. Yeah, we're going to explore that in depth. But you two are absolutely right. Okay, so your grandparents are probably baby boomers. And then we have Generation X, Gen X, okay? I am Gen X, and in most cases, your parents are probably Gen X, born between 65 and 80. My guess is most of your parents are probably born between 65 and 80. Brittany says it took her breaking her ankle to finally get her to stop. I know, right? We're gonna have fun with this one, folks. We're gonna have fun with it. So your parents. So when I talk about Generation X, when I talk about baby boomers, think about your grandparents. When I talk about Gen X, think about your parents. And I want you to do exactly what Brittany and Sarah are doing right now. Type in what your parents or grandparents do and so forth, and how they respond as we go through all of this, because there's a lot of rich content in here. We have a lot of baby boomers that will retire and come back for more money. You know, the funny thing is about the baby boomers is they retire and they get freaking bored. We're going to talk about this, and this is going to be a good conversation. Baby boomers get bored and they come back. So Joseph says, my 90-year-old grandma is totally a traditionalist. My parents are boomers, and you consider yourself Exial. That'll work. I'll take an Exial, right? Totally. Okay, let's keep going. We're going to use my oldest son, John, as an example. He's what you would call a millennial. And then we are going to use my daughter, Sierra, as an example. She's Gen Z. Now, as you can see, this is an old-ass picture, right? So they're all much older than what you see right here. But still, we're going to use these folks as examples as we go forward, okay? All right, so let's first talk baby boomers. So I think it was Joseph said that, let's see, at least 70. And Anthony also said my grandma is at least 70 and shows no sign of stopping. Okay, so, and Joseph, I know that you had a boomer in your family and so forth. So let's talk about these boomers. Think about your grandparents, okay? And a lot of you have boomers in your family. This is going to sound familiar. So growing up, they grew up in a time of relative economic prosperity, and many of them were the first in their families to earn degrees. So maybe some of you have boomer grandparents who earned a degree, perhaps. But here's what it really comes down to boomers when it comes to their work ethic. Extremely hardworking, driven, dedicated, want to be recognized for their contributions, equating work and position with self-worth. They define themselves through their work ethic. That's how they perceive themselves. So all these things that you guys were saying, working hard, workaholics, and didn't retire until she broke her ankle and so on and so forth, absolutely the case. That's how boomers think, right? When it comes to authority, boomers, they believe in hierarchical structures. They like structure. They like systems. Boomers really get into that. They believe that positions of power and authority are earned, and because they've been earned, you better respect my authority. All right? So boomers don't do well when they are challenged in terms of their authority because they're like, I work my ass off. All you do is screw around and so on and so forth. They want that kind of respect. All right. So this is my father. Let's come back on up here. Give you a little insight into my father. Let's go ahead and come to this one. He was the first in his family to earn a college degree. He majored in forestry. He didn't do tech well. Think about all your grandparents and trying to teach them to use a cell phone or technology or so forth. They don't do tech well. And one time my father bought a thumb drive and was irritated that the thumb drive didn't come with instructions. And I'm kind of like, all right, whatever. Let's see. He believed in hard work. If you worked hard, that was the only ticket you needed. Okay? So as I said here, he regularly hired undocumented workers and paid them well because they worked hard and earned it. So I can tell you whole stories of my father and his business and how he hired people and paid people and so on and so forth. If you worked hard, you held a special place in his heart, and he literally sacrificed a lot of himself to help others because they earned it. That's the way you got into my father's heart, was through hard work. He didn't care about papers. He didn't care about your family lineage. He didn't care about religion or ethnicity. If you brought work, you were in. Let's see. So Brittany says, my father is a boomer, but everything you say about him, he's not like that. Yeah. And by the way, a quick note on that. This is research in aggregate. Individuals are still individuals. This is why demographics cannot replace psychographics. So when we are talking about these generations, we are talking about them as a whole. But individuals are still individuals. And so what we're talking about here are demographics, using them as a backdoor to psychographics. But as we know, that doesn't always work, and you need to make sure you don't just stereotype everybody. So really good point, Brittany. Joseph, resident IT specialist with technology in my home. Yes, right? Ain't that the truth? Sarah says, they respect younger generation that works hard. That's how you connect with them. Okay, everyone, what Sarah just said is a really, really good point. The way you demonstrate to baby boomers that you should be listened to and respected is by working hard. And that's how it was with my father, right? Is if you work hard, they count you as on the inside. So remember, everyone remember, business communication is about affecting and influencing the feelings and attitudes and behaviors of others and ourselves. So if we want to affect baby boomers, we need to demonstrate to them that we are worth their time. And the way we do that is through hard work and respecting the work that they do. Okay, let's continue on. So those are baby boomers. Now we're going to do Gen Xers. This is my generation, okay? I'm very much a Gen Xer. They grew up as latchkey kids, okay? So latchkey kid meaning, my parents divorced and my mother left when I was younger. She went off and did her thing and so forth, and I ended up staying with my father. And my father was working because he's a baby boomer. Right? So he's working. So my brother and I, we raised ourselves. That's not an exaggeration. We raised ourselves. That's what it means to be a latchkey kid. Minimal parental supervision. The Gen Xers tend to be more highly educated because that was instilled in them. When it comes to values of a Gen X, they tend to be independent, self-reliant, pragmatic, direct, informational, and we're going to come back to this, put a pin in this one, determined to give their children the childhood they never had. We're going to come back to this one, right? Okay. When it comes to a work ethic, my generation works, but they want work-life balance. They're not interested in working horribly long hours, and they don't really care about titles and so forth. And they're not really into, loyalty to employers. They'll go where there's the best opportunity. When it comes to authority, they tend to be cynical, questioning authority and disliking direct supervision. And they don't really work in teams that well. By the way, many of you are millennials and Gen Z. You guys work in teams much, much better than my generation. So we'll talk more about that. We're just kind of giving an overview right now. So in terms of me, my mother left to do her thing when I was 12. So my brother and I raised ourselves. That's very Gen X. I moved to France when I was 15, went to a French school, spent some summer hitchhiking across Europe. I had no parental supervision. I can do whatever the hell I want. That's very Gen X and independent and pragmatic. Earned degrees. My children always had one parent at home. So remember, the research says that this generation wanted to give their children the childhood they never had. And so my wife and I both together decided that there will always be one parent at home. So if one person is working, the other stays home. And we would switch. Sometimes she was the stay-at-home. Most of the time she was. Many times I was the stay-at-home. And it all depended on who was in school and who was working. This way, we were both able to build a career. We both have solid careers. But we also made sure there was always a kid at home. That's very Gen X, okay? And yeah, I don't play well with others. Sarah says, respect younger... Yes, we got that. Sorry, just trying to keep up with things. Okay, let's keep going. Now we have millennials. Many of you may be a millennial. If you're, in your late 20s or so, 26, 27, 28, so on and so forth, you're a millennial. Okay. So now millennials grew up being supervised and escorted by their parents who were just terrified of kidnapping, school violence, drugs, and so on and so forth. So my generation became helicopter parents because we wanted our children to have the childhood we didn't have. And the world kind of became crazy with fears of school shootings and drugs and stranger danger and so on and so forth. And so we were like, you need to be home at this time. You need to tell us where you are. You need to tell us what you're doing and so on and so forth. I never had to tell my father anything. I mean, I came and went as I wanted. My brother came and went. The only rule was when you get home, it doesn't matter what time you get home. You can come home whenever you want. The only rule was wake him up and tell him you were home. That was the only rule. But he didn't know where we were. Let's see. Millennials were the first generation with their own calendar. Okay, now check this out. And this goes on to Gen Z as well for you younger ones, right? But just raise a quick hand or say me, did you have soccer and cheer and piano lessons and, dance and theater and whatever, all these things you had to do. And your parents were your taxi service, and your parents had to arrange their schedule to align with your calendar and all the school activities and outside of school activities you were doing. Tell me if you were one of those, because millennials were the first generation where that sort of thing happened. Brittany says, yes, you're right. Oh, wow. My mother was very helicopter. She was born in 61. Yes. Yeah, very helicopter. The first generation really to be so. So Joseph says football and many school bands. Brittany, yes, had schedules, dance, piano, band, etc. Homeschooled as well. Exactly. So this is the first generation where the parents, we went to the extreme on the other side. Okay, so where my father was like I say, my brother and I raised ourselves, and that's not an exaggeration. We raised ourselves. And so I went, and my generation went to the opposite end of the spectrum, and it's now we are hovering over every aspect of your childhood to make sure you're safe and happy and all this stuff, okay? So we went too far the other side. More about millennials. Millennials are motivated by a need to feel a sense of belonging to meaningful communities. It's not by accident that the millennials invented social media. By the way, I reject any bad talk of any generation. Every generation is different. Different doesn't mean good or bad. It means different. And furthermore, every value is like fire. It can be used for good. It can be used for bad. So, we're not going to be dissing generations here. But millennials got into social media. They invented social media because they like those connections, right? Work ethic with millennials. They want work, life, and social balance, okay? So check this out. We'll do it with my son here in a moment. Motivated by money. Yes, millennials are more motivated by money. We're going to talk about why that is here more in a moment. They expect more raises and promotions. We're going to talk about this. Authority. Millennials actually deal really well with feedback. If they respect the authority, if they respect their bosses and so forth, they really like structure, goals, and feedback. And they deal with it a whole lot better than just about any other generation. All right. Some comments here. Brittany, fun fact, while at dance, my mom would go to the library and get books for me. Yes, books on tape so you could increase your vocabulary. So even during her downtime, she's thinking about how to help you. Every generation has their strengths and weaknesses, and a strength used incorrectly is a weakness, and a weakness used well is a strength. So, yeah, all generations are awesome. All generations bring their own special sauce to the table. So, talking about my son here for a moment, splits his time between, I wrote this wrong, between himself, his wife, and his family. So here's something that's unique about millennials and has gone on to Gen Z, but is foreign to folks like me. He has friends. Okay, now let me explain why this is weird. In my generation, friends were something you had when you were in school, right? That's a childhood thing. And so you'd go off and have friends and so on and so forth. But then once you grow up, okay, you start your family and so on and so forth, and you have friends, as in neighbors and somebody who you occasionally have a game day with and so on and so forth. But for the most part, the idea of hanging out with friends is, my generation does not hang out with friends, okay? Whereas millennials and Gen Z, take you guys for example, there's probably a ton of you who are like, oh no, I spend probably 2 or 3 hours a day with my friends. And it's kind of like, really? Huh. Well, that's where millennials started. They wanted work, they wanted life, and they wanted social balance. Let's come back over here. Values validation from those he respects and admires. This is very millennial. Likes trying new things. Millennials love to try stuff. They don't accept yesterday's solutions. Millennials look at yesterday's solutions from boomers and Gen X and say, I think we can do better. So millennials are always experimenting, which is why we've seen so many inventors from millennials. Here's a big thing about millennials, and my son feels this, sees work as necessary to pay the bills, but not something that should infringe on his life or his social agenda or anything. Boomers see themselves through their work, and Gen Z, in many ways, see themselves through their work to a tremendous extent. Millennials say, I have to work to pay bills, but otherwise I have no interest in it. That is not how I define myself. I do not define myself through my work or my position. I define myself by what I do, what I try, what I do with my friends and my activities and things like that. This is very millennial. By the way, we have, I am a millennial, but I moved to the U.S. when I was 10, so my parents were focused more on putting us through school and less on activities. Little different. Yes. Okay, so this is a super great point. I'm talking a little bit about kind of generally the U.S. version. Different countries have different, cycles through this and so forth. Furthermore, when you bring together international with generational, things get a little bit more interesting and tricky. But I really also like this. Move to the U.S., the focus on school and so forth. Many, many immigrants, when they come to the U.S., they're doing it for their kids. We want, we would like to prosper, says the parents, but we really want to make sure our kids prosper. So we're going to invest everything we need to into helping our kids be successful. So that's what I'm kind of reading there. So Brittany, I agree with that. Work isn't life for me. Yes, it's more about your creative endeavors. Exactly. Okay, let's go on to our last one, Gen Z. Many of you are Gen Z. If you're, 25 or under, you're Gen Z. So what are Gen Zs in general like? Well, Gen Zs grew up during the Great Recession and also in a time of never-ending content. Gen Z has grown up in a world of just constant real-time news, dialogue, social, video, and media, and just interactions and entertainment. It's just constant. It is a regular part of your life right now, and we're going to talk more about this later. Half of you have another window open or are on your phone engaging with content in another medium. And that's really normal for Gen Z. All right, we're going to talk more about that. Values, they're very global in their thinking. Since Gen Z grew up in never-ending content, this is global content. And so they don't really see themselves as, I'm just part of this community. They see themselves as part of a larger global community, okay? Let's see, very accepting of social diversity. It's Gen Z that's really driving a lot of the social diversity initiatives. And information on demand. Gen Z wants information on demand. Many of you may be watching and engaging with this thinking, well, I want to watch and engage because I want the extra credit points. These light bulbs, they're awesome, right? But you also know in the back of your head that this lecture is available online. And so later on, when you have to write about context or you have to do something else, you can pull this lecture up later on. And so that's kind of the information on demand aspect. This generation is really entrepreneurial. Half of you probably one day are thinking, I wouldn't mind starting my own business. So let me know if one of you is like, yeah, actually, I think one day I'd like to work for myself. I'd like to start my own business. In the past, the idea of starting your own business was kind of crazy talk. Whereas now that's like really normal, right? Let's see, Sarah. I can see the global for the music, pop. K-pop is just a great example, right? Nobody would know about K-pop if it weren't for Gen Z. That is a Gen Z invention, right? That's a great, great example. And then, Joseph, that's your goal, right? With going to school, it's all about one day starting a business. So, yes, absolutely. We're doing great on the light bulbs. I think you should be having one more light bulb. I'm going to make sure. There we go. Okay, so that's something about their generation. Now, here's something else when it comes to authority down there at the bottom. They like to have really intense relationships with authority. All right? I'll show you more about that here in a moment. Let's talk about my daughter. All right? Highly self-driven. She earned a medical assistant certification in high school, had an associate's by 19. She's finishing up her first bachelor's and is working on her next degree here soon. Really champions LGBTQ causes and so forth. And we also have LGBTQ members in our family and so forth. And then here's the thing I wanted to focus on, I wanted to ask you guys about. She considers her boss and her parents close friends. Okay, now, do me a favor. Who here considers your mother and or father, one or the other or both, who would say that your parent is a friend? Who would call their parent a friend? In the meantime, I'm going to read Brittany here. Being an indie author eventually required, it's going to require you to start your own business. That is it. That is absolutely the case. Who considers their parents their friends? Sierra considers, myself and, my wife or mother or friend, I don't get that. My parents were not my friends. They were my parents, right? That's a weird thing to me, to my generation. Brittany, you would. Your mom is your best friend, and then not until mid-20s, though, says Joseph. That's a good point. Just to share with you a teeny tiny little story. There's a movie out there. You probably haven't seen it, but I wish you would. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So it's with Harrison Ford and Sean Connery played his father. And Harrison Ford and his father were not close growing up. And at this one scene, they're arguing back and forth that you are an awful parent. No, I was a great parent. No, you were awful, and so on and so forth. And then at one point, Sean Connery says to Harrison Ford, "You left just when you were becoming interesting." Now, my father said that to me once, and he didn't get it from the movie. I left when I was 18. And at one point later when I was older, he says, "Yeah, you left just when you were becoming an interesting person." So that's kind of what I grew up in. Now, let's see, Diane, now that I'm older, I consider my mom my friend. But growing up, she was my mom. Yeah, that kind of makes some sense. I think that kind of makes some sense. I think I can agree with that to an extent. I'm an older generation, it's different, but that makes sense to me, right? She passed 7 years ago. I'm sorry to hear that. My father passed. I get it. I feel you. Let's see, as I got older, I began to consider them friends. Yeah, so this is something I can relate with. The idea that as a kid, let's face it, parents. But as you get older and they get a little bit more chill, yes, parents get more chill as they get older because they start to realize that, the kid's going to turn out how they're going to turn out. I don't have to worry about everything, right? Then I could kind of see that relationship changing. Okay, so now let's have a little bit of fun here. Now, I just gave you a primer on each one of these generations. Let's look at how these generations work together in the workforce, right? Let's look at attitudes toward work. So you work with boomers, you work with Gen X, you work with millennials. Boomers, as we said, they're hardworking and very driven. They equate hard work and position to self-worth. As the word Gen X, they don't really want to work all that hard. They'll work and they like their work, but they don't want to work all that hard. Whereas millennials are like, I just work for the money. That's the only reason I'm here. So it's not surprising that especially between millennials and boomers, there would be a disconnect because boomers are, your work defines who you are. And millennials are like, I'm just doing this to pay my bills. The rest can go to hell. You see where that disconnect can happen. So I find that fascinating. When they stop disciplining you, they'll become your friends. Yeah, when they get just a little bit more chill. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Okay. Authority. Okay, now this one's interesting, at least to me. Boomers believe position of authority are earned and should be respected, whereas Gen X, my generation, authority can go to hell. We love to question authority. We are very cynical about authority, and we don't like authority. And so you can see boomers and my generation, Gen X, being at odds because we're on polar opposites when it comes to authority. Whereas millennials, they actually kind of have it figured out when it comes to authority. They really like structure, clear supervision, feedback. They like mentorship and so forth. So, they can kind of benefit from both generations better than the other generations can. Let's see, a lot of millennials like to change every 2 years or so. Yes, it's actually encouraged. It's actually encouraged these days from HR and so forth. Yeah, that's how they get the raises. It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. We could talk about that more later on, but it's right. Okay, let's talk social diversity for a moment. And in this case, just to kind of show an extreme example, I am going to include traditionalists and then I'm going to include Gen Z, okay? This is just to kind of give us an extreme case of social diversity. And I'm going to use the case of bathrooms as an example. Now, in the workplace, we have to figure out how we're going to use the bathrooms. So this is not a weird-ass example. This is a very, very down-to-earth practical example. How are we going to deal with the bathrooms, right? Well, a traditionalist is called a traditionalist because they like tradition. It's tradition regarding family, religion, work, and important, and so forth. Gen X is just pragmatic and informal. I just want to solve the problem. Whereas Gen Z, much more accepting and embracing of, say, LGBTQ issues, right? So let's take bathrooms, for example. If you go to your typical, I'm not saying your traditionalist or my traditionalist, if you go to a typical traditionalist and say, hey, what bathrooms should somebody use? The traditionalist would look at you like you had bats coming out of your ear. What do you mean? What bathroom do you use? There's a little picture on the door, and you use the picture that is aligned with you. And if you don't know what you are, you just open your pants up, take a look, and you can figure out what bathroom you use. To them, this is a stupid, ridiculous, they can't even conceive of the question. Okay. So then you go to Gen X, right? My tradition. And again, I'm talking about tradition. I'm not talking about me. Gen X would say, oh, okay, this is a real issue. We need to figure it out. I'll tell you what. I've got an easy solution. We have the men's bathroom, and we have the women's bathroom, and then we have the family bathroom. And the family bathroom is for whomever. Now, if you go to a mall here in the state of Utah, you will see this quite often. The idea of there's men's, there's women's, and there's family. And the idea of family is that a father or mother could go in there with their son or their daughter, and gender doesn't matter, and they can deal with their kid and so on and so forth. And so this is the pragmatic way, a very Gen X way, of solving the problem. Here's a nice, simple, straightforward, pragmatic solution. All done. Okay. Then you got Gen Z, and you got my daughter. And many in Gen Z, and I'm not talking about your Gen Z, I'm just talking in general, because you may feel differently, and you are absolutely enabled and empowered to feel differently. Gen Z is like, what does it matter? I don't audit people when they walk in the bathroom. People don't audit me. I'm not looking at people's junk and trying to figure. I walk in, I go in my stall, I do my business, and I leave. What does it matter? And by the way, last I checked, every single bathroom in your home is universal. And when you go to a friend's home, it's a universal bathroom. What does it matter? Use the bathroom that you identify with. So now you can see how each generation would approach this differently and why we're often at loggerheads when it comes to social diversity. And this matters in the workforce because we have social diversity in the workforce. Now we have some comments here real quick. Let me make sure I've got the right button. There we go. I got the right button. an interesting experience in the workforce with a boomer lady who had used this is how we do things. Yes, this is how we do things. It's traditional. This is normal. This is just prima facie the right thing to do things, the right way to do things, right? Yeah, when he started the team. I love it. Gabriel was not able to accept at one point. Oh, Gabriel continues. At one point, I got to the manager and she ended up switching to another shift. That's a very Gen X thing to do. What is the pragmatic thing to do? If you cannot handle this, what do? Change shifts. That's a very Gen X thinking. I'm not sure that they were Gen X. I'm just saying that's a pragmatic solution. This is why we need unisex bathrooms, right? Yeah, makes sense to me. I tend to be more on my Gen Z side, but that's because I have family members who are directly impacted by this. And so, but I get where others are coming from. I'm not talking right or wrong. I'm just saying my values, right? But my values don't need to be somebody else's values and vice versa. Okay, let's continue on. Let's go to, well, I'm not going to worry about this. I want to give you guys time, so I want to go to context. Okay, good conversation on generations, and the light bulbs demonstrate I really appreciate your engagement and discussion and willingness to share your perspective on generations, because we're going through it right now. I'm Gen Z, and you're millennial and I'm Gen X. I'm Gen X. You're millennial and Gen Z. And so we have to bridge generational differences just between us, right? Well, this is part of context. Now, let me talk about context for a moment. Context is it seems to me, it has been my experience in my decades of teaching, the context is the most difficult thing for someone to understand because it is so everywhere. Context is always on. It's hard to understand dark when you have never seen dark. It is always light. It's like the fish the old fish that goes up to the two fish swimming in the water and saying, "Hey boys, how's the water today?" and then swims off. And then the two fish look at each other and go, "What the hell's water?" Okay? We swim in context constantly, and so it's hard to understand it. So, I am about to explain context, and you won't remember it. And the reason you won't remember it is because of the context. Okay? So we're going to get really, really meta here. I'm going to show you why you won't remember context because of the context of right now and us. Okay, so with that, I'm going to read this. Context is the way in which the circumstances, environment, those present, social relationships, and background information shape the meaning and interpretation of messages exchanged between the sender and the receiver. What does that mean? Hey, we're sending messages back and forth. I'm doing this and I'm gesticulating and so forth. You're sending messages to me through the chat and so forth. And you are interpreting my messages and I am interpreting your messages. But context is the lens through which we do these interpretations. There's 4 kinds of context that I'm going to show you. We got temporal, physical, social, and cultural. Let me show you what they are. Temporal context refers to the ways in which time and space shape the meaning and interpretation of what's being communicated. So, for example, if my boss is trying to communicate something to me on Friday at 5 p.m., I'm not going to listen. Now, I like my boss and I like my job and I believe in what we're doing and it's a domain of self-worth for me, but it's Friday at 5 p.m. for crying out loud. I'm not listening. My head is somewhere else. That's temporal context. Or if we're at the end of the semester, okay, time and space, end of the semester, you're just kind of like, I'm just ready to get done. I'm ready to be done. So I'm just going to get the assignments done, hand them in. Okay, it might turn my A to an A minus, whatever. I'm just ready to be done, okay? Let me show you right now. This class is Monday at 8 a.m. You will not remember temporal context because of the temporal context. A lecture on Monday at 8 a.m. really gets in the way of understanding the material. Like I said, we're getting meta, but you will not remember temporal context because of the temporal context of the moment. A lecture on Monday at 8 a.m. That's temporal. All right? Then we got physical context. This is the ways in which the actual physical location in which the communication is happening affects the meaning and interpretation of the communication, right? So, attending class over live stream. I'll give you the example right now. The physical location of this lecture is a live stream that gives you limited options for interaction and a plethora of multitasking temptations. Some of you are playing a video game right now. This is not me accusing. This is me demonstrating why physical context matters for us right now. Some are playing video games. Some of you are texting. Some are working on another assignment right now. That's a common one. Working on another assignment on another screen, that sort of thing. Watching a video and just kind of having this going in the background and so forth. You will not remember physical context because of the physical context of this lecture, a live stream with lots of things to distract you. All right? Okay, let's keep going. Then we got social context. The ways in which the social relationship between the sender and the receiver affects the meaning and interpretation, right? So we have professor and student, parent, child, manager, employee. So, for example, you raise your hand, just say yes, whatever, right? Have you ever had your parents tell you something and you're like, want, whatever. But then your friend tells you the same thing and you go, really? Oh, I ought to think about that. That is an example of social context. Something coming from one social group is just in one ear and out the other. But if the same thing comes from another social group, now you're listening. So in the case of this class and me teaching social context, you're not going to remember social context. By the way, whenever I say that, I hope you say, screw you, I'm going to remember this. See? You're not going to remember it because of the natural antagonism that exists between professor and student. Now, I'm not suggesting that you feel antagonism toward me, and I certainly feel like I don't feel antagonism toward you. But let's face it, there is a social construct. There is this understanding that student and professor, there's a level of antagonism in that relationship. Furthermore, society, social context says, I'm just here for the grade. I don't care if I remember this or not. I don't care. I'm just here for the grade. I just need the points. Now, I am not saying that you personally don't care about learning this and you're in it for just the points, but that is an overwhelming social mechanism that often drives us. And so you will not remember social context because of the social context, okay? By the way, Kaylin says, I was sitting there thinking, I'm going to remember this out of stubbornness at the point. I'm going to give you 2 light bulbs for that, because that's exactly what I want. I want the natural antagonism between student and professor. And for me as an old man and professor saying, you're not going to remember because of this, I want that to trigger in you 2 middle fingers and say, I'm going to remember, just to show you. That brings me to the last one. By the way, I'm exaggerating to make a point, right? You get it. Cultural context. How the distinct values, beliefs, and communication styles of different cultures or groups affect the meaning and interpretation. So America and China, we can't communicate. Boomer and Gen Z, we can't communicate. Democrat, Republican, we can't communicate. Well, in the case of our age, I'm an old man. I'm an old white male. You know what to do with old white males. Don't listen to a word they say, okay? And you're just a bunch of punk-ass kids. Like you have anything valuable to add to this world. You see that kind of generational difference, that cultural difference? And so that affects our relationship right now. Now, the point of all of this is that context affects us all the time. And you need to think about it when you say, like, write your audience analysis. It'll ask for the context. By the way, because of context, I've had people when I say, hey, write a note to your grandmother, and they'll say, how many words? That's because of the context of student-professor. Or, asking a student to write an email, and they'll ask, does it need to be an APA? That's because of the context of asking to write an email as a school assignment, right? Brittany, you wrote the email. You've done this assignment. I've had students ask, does it need to be an APA? There's no way in the world anybody has ever thought on the face of the planet an email should be an APA format, except since it's a school assignment, that context bleeds over. So, I hope that you remember context because of all this. And of course, you can always come back to this because you believe in just-in-time learning and this information is available to you. All right. So Anthony says, you know what to do with old white male. Don't listen to a word they ever say. Yeah. Don't trust authority. Okay. Hey, guys, this has been great. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in the last 2 light bulbs. And we're going to hook you up for the points. That's it. I was able to keep it under an hour. I said I would keep it under an hour, and we're at 57 minutes. So I'm amazing. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to give you and your teams the time. You have an audience analysis coming up that you need to work on. Don't wait to the last minute of this audience analysis. This is what requires all the research. You need to think about demographics, psychographics, all 4 contexts, and so forth. So get together with your teams over Zoom. Brittany's team, you guys are doing Discord. Discord's always a good solution. Google Meet is a good solution. I'm actually going to update some stuff in Canvas for future students to let them know these are options. Meet with your team, start thinking about the audience analysis, figure out who's going to do what in that piece of the assignment, and get going on it. All right? So, yeah, we're wrapping up. As always, I'm going to stick around and answer any questions, but send me an email and let me know that you were here and you contributed. Israel, you just contributed, so you contributed, you're good. Send me an email, let me know you contributed, and these extra credit points are yours. All right? Okay. Get to work, and we'll talk to you again real soon. Have a good one. And like I say, if you have any questions, I'm here for a couple minutes. Thank you, Brittany. We'll see ya. All right, I don't see any questions coming in, and I see people dropping off. So have a great rest of the day. And oh, by the way, does the audience analysis need to be based off real statistics? Yes, you need to research your audience. So make it a very narrow, specific group. The smaller the group, the better. And research them. Yeah, this is what research is for. So yes, needs to be based on real research. My email is in Canvas, so just send it to, through Canvas, and you can send it there, or you can do lawn.sch. There, that's my email, but you can send it through Canvas. All right, guys, you're all set. So have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon.